Congratulations, Simon, first of all, on the book. I think we deserve a round of applause for getting that.
Thank you.
So it's a real pleasure having a chance to do this. Both Simon and I are longtime members of the Conduit, and having been an author and recently had a book out, what a journey it's been. So yeah, huge congratulations on this milestone.
Thank you.
So I thought today what we'll do is we'll spend about half an hour in discussion, and I want to grill Simon, make him sweat. Looks very cool now. He might look very different at the end of this, but after that, I'd love to open up for Q&A and your thoughts and questions as well. So Simon, first of all, I love the book. So huge congratulations on getting so many ideas and insights. I find it profoundly practical, but also very inspiring. I love that combination. So really well done there. I want to start with the beginning of the book, where there's a very personal story of how you got into this. And do you want to share a little bit about how that story happened and what you were feeling at the time as well?
Sure. So I grew up with this belief that success would be defined by my job title. Be a banker, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an accountant. And so after graduating from the London School of Economics, I started in the financial industry at what was probably the worst possible time I could have started. It was the middle of 2007. This was a year before the global financial crisis. And the company that I decided to start with was Lehman Brothers. So when you think about a good start to your career, this is probably the worst that I could have. And so 14 months after I joined, this company I started with was facing bankruptcy. But as I write in the book, while it was a painful moment in the career journey, it was also a blessing in disguise, because it kick-started the longest journey that we as humans make, the inches from our heads to our hearts. Never an easy journey, but the most important and fulfilling that we will ever embark on. Now, in reference to the story that Sharaf mentioned, what happened is that after Lehman Brothers, I decided to join another company. I stayed within the financial services industry. But this company was killing my health, mentally and physically. I was working in a hedge fund. Now, on the outside, that sounds glamorous. Simon is working in a hedge fund. Only if you are the senior portfolio manager or you are at the higher echelons of management. For me, being a junior, I was more akin to the T-boy. I was fetching everybody's lunches. I was making sure there was no mistakes by the people above me that happened. I was often in the office around 6 or 7 in the morning, not out very often until 10 or 11 at night. And my family here will probably remember one time I got home when there was a severe delay on public transport, and I got called back into the office again because the New York office of that company was snowed under, and they needed the junior from the London office to sort things out from their end. And it got to a point where I was completely burnt out, which is the story you will read in chapter 1. And that was the moment that I realized that if I continued with this job, it was going to cost me both my physical and my mental health. And I thought to myself, is this something that is worth continuing with? And so what I did is I handed in my resignation, and I looked at getting another job in finance because that was my background. But I wanted something that was more 9 to 5, that would give me the time to focus on my health, but also allow me to explore the things that I really wanted to do. And that, for me, was a very pivotal moment that led to the first chapter in the book.
Thanks, Simon. It was really moving. And actually, I set up my first organization as an entrepreneur on the day that Lehman collapsed as well. So I think we have some destiny in common somehow as well. But, okay, so, as an immigrant as well, I know you have a Malaysian origin. I lived in Malaysia for a few years, but with an Indian background myself, trying to unwind all these mental models from our childhood, how we grew up, about success, as you talked about. How did you, there was a very inspiring story of the need to change, but there's a lot of baggage to unload in that journey. How did you do that?
Definitely. I think that when I look at society in general, what I notice is that many of us, we tend to be exhausted not because we are doing too much, but because we are running someone else's race. We are living up often to someone else's definition of success. Now, if you've ever read the book by Bronnie Ware, The Top Regrets of the Dying, you might recall that the number one regret was I wish I lived a life more true to myself than a life lived for others. And so for me, the journey really started when I reflected on what was my own definition of success. What did fulfillment look like, and what sort of impact did I want to have? And I think only when we begin to own those definitions can we start taking responsibility for where we are and where we want to be. And that for me was the beginning of how I started to shift those mental models. Because we don't realize and appreciate that what goes into the mind actually weaves the fabric of our reality. And so only when we adjust the blueprint that dictates that painting, if you will, that's when we begin to be the master of our destiny. You know, think of your thoughts as colors on a palette. We have the ability to choose another color. That is one of the greatest skills we have. But we don't take ownership of that. And we let other people hold that brush and choose the colors for us. And so when we take hold of that brush ourselves, we can paint anything that we desire.
Thanks. It's a beautiful image there as well. And that idea of painting out with our own brush, I think that sort of piece there. So I know you took that leap, you went and found your own path as a coach, a speaker and so on, and the book came along. And I think, back to that image of a painting, maybe that was the Mona Lisa waiting ahead and so on as well. So as you painted that, like, how did you change? Often I think as writers, we develop as much as we hope our readers will. How did you change by all the research and the thinking that went into the book?
The book process for me was incredibly personal, but also one of the most challenging things that I have ever done. Now, I don't say that because writing isn't a challenge. Of course, writing a book, if you've never done one before, is a challenge, especially for me if the longest thing you've written before was a social media caption or a newsletter. And to jump from that to 65,000 words, I mean, that is a huge jump. It's like swimming and starting off in the deep end with no swimming lessons. Now, tie into that the fact that you've now become a parent for the first time, just a few weeks after you've got your book deal. And the world has gone into lockdown. And nobody can come into your home to support you. Now, when you bring all of those things together, you can see why I say it is one of the greatest challenges I have ever faced. But at the same time, to the question of how it has affected me, how it has developed me, it has done so in a very transformational way. Because I think what we realize when we do face challenges is that they are essential for our growth. Without them, we don't realize how strong we are and what we're capable of. It reminds us of what is most important and where we should be channeling our energy towards. And so as I started writing, the person, and I often get asked, who was I writing to? Who did I have in my imagination that I was writing to? Because often editors will say, think about your target audience. Think about as if you're writing to that individual. For me, it was really the Simon who was that 20-year-old in that corporate job, burnt out, lost, not knowing what he wanted to do, lacking energy. And so as I was writing to this Simon, it was beautiful in a way because it tapped into something that Diana Chow said, and it's a quote that I mentioned in chapter 2 of the book. She said that writing is humanity distilled into ink. And so the process of writing for me was a conduit to learning more about myself. I often say that you can't have self-development without self-awareness, and that is why true wisdom begins with knowing yourself. And so writing this book, in a way, allowed me to get to know more about myself, but also to condense all the things that I've learned over the years into something that will hopefully resonate with the readers.
Very powerful, Simon. And if you were writing a letter back to that idea of a legacy to the, let's call it the young Simon, if I know you're still young, Simon, of course, but the younger Simon, what are the three things that all the research in the book and all the reflection you did in writing it, what three things would you tell that young Simon?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is to listen to your heart over the opinions of others. Because so often what happens is that when we grow up, we seek validation from other people, whether they are our colleagues, our friendship circles, our peer groups. But I think when we listen to our heart, and remember what I said at the beginning, the longest journey we make is from our head to our hearts. And there's a reason for that, because it's never an easy journey. But when we begin to listen to it, it may not always lead us to where we want to be, but it will always lead us to where we need to be. So the first thing I would say is listen to your heart. There is always wisdom in what it is saying. The second is to just focus on being better than who you were yesterday. Because in today's society, especially with social media, it can be so easy to compare where we are and what we're doing with other people. But if we shift that focus to our own journey, are we just a little bit better than who we were yesterday? In no time, we will discover our own potential. Imagine this for a moment. One step forward each day, a year from now, that is 365 steps forward. Just imagine who and where you could be. So that's the second. And then the third is to experiment, experiment, experiment. Now, this speaks a lot to the young Simon, because I thought success and failure were opposites. You either succeeded or you failed. But actually, you can't experience true success without failing along the way. It's impossible. Whenever you do something for the first time, you are going to fail. But if we have the humility to seek the lessons within it and the opportunities that are born from that, then actually we become adaptable to whatever the world throws our way. We become adaptable, which is an important skill when you look at what has been going on in the world in the last few years. The ability to adapt whatever the world throws your way. So those would be the three things I would share.
Thanks, Simon. And one of the things that you talked very powerfully in the book about elevating our consciousness and taking away some of the barriers. And there's a wonderful quote, I was looking for it in my notes, that I think you took from Marcel Proust, I think, as well. So this idea, let me repeat this, it's such a beautiful quote. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And for me, it made me think a lot. I work with a lot of leaders, as you do, across organizations, from large companies to governments to social sector organizations. And I find often people have, they've made it conventionally. Back to your idea of striving, and they've got the fancy job title, they're successful, quote unquote, in someone else's eyes, to use your language. They feel a bit empty inside. What advice would you give them? How can they reframe? How can they elevate that consciousness and find what they really want to do and find that energy?
Sure, and that's why for me, it all begins with understanding what is important to us. I think the reason why so many lack energy is they just don't know what is important for them. So that doesn't give them direction. And so they're still following someone else's path. And the reason why they get exhausted and tired is because they can already predict the feeling of what that day is going to hold. They already can predict the feeling of the week ahead. And so it becomes boring. It becomes mundane. But when you cannot predict the feeling because, well, there is uncertainty, there's challenge, there's ways that you can grow, that for me is when we get energy. Because if life is so predictable, of course, there's not much to look forward to. But it begins with understanding what is important to us. And that's why inner work is so important. Sitting down and understanding what is your life plan. I mean, I can imagine many people working in companies would have done this for their bosses or their management, and they've planned out the next quarter, the year's goals. But when was the last time we did that for ourselves? That we sat down, we paused, took out a bit of paper, and started to plan our life trajectory. And so for me, that's how we get energized. Because when we have a vision that is compelling, that is magnetic in nature, productivity becomes easy. I mean, you just want to wake up every morning and you're excited about possibilities. You don't think of lack of resources, you think about resourcefulness. And so that's for me where energy can be created.
Thanks, Simon. And you talked in the book very movingly as well about this idea of electrifying your environment. And we're in the Conduits, an incredible community. I know both of us have had an incredible experience being part of this community and had so many. I talk a lot about the idea of nurturing. You know, how do other people around us help us to places we wouldn't have got to otherwise? So, you know, as we're thinking about leaders like that, who are thinking about that new path, that inner work is really important. But how can other people around us help us? Well, what tips would you have for how we can mobilize, especially given many people in this room are lucky to have this sort of tribe around them too?
Sure, and it's actually a good question, because I often get asked, Simon, well, I don't have the opportunity like you do to spend time with, you know, people who are doing incredible things in their field. How do I start? And there's a tip that I share in that chapter, Electrify Your Environment, which is how I started. I didn't have access to a lot of people that I now have access to. So when I started, I just created an MBA. Now, I'm not referring to MBA, the degree you get from business school. I'm referring to MBA as Mental Board of Advisors. So how can you choose an advisory board that you can seek counsel from in the domain of your mind when you are facing big life challenges or decisions? And when you do, you close your eyes, you go into this mental boardroom, you pull out the chair, you sit down, and you put out that question, that big decision you're going through, into the middle of that table. And you look at each of these advisors in turn, and you listen to what he or she has to say. Now, what you're doing in this MBA is you are accessing their wisdom and their insights. It is, in a way, shifting your perspective. Because often all we need is a shift in perspective. And that changes how we see our own world.
How adventurous are you feeling, Simon? Should we try this out? So I'm going to ask, actually, we're all sitting, do we all know the person sitting next to us? No? Okay. Some mostly knows. Okay, so try, if you can, to find someone you don't know. I wonder if, is there something on your mind you can ask them? Let's do just a 2 or 3 minute thing, just to see how this plays out. And what advice would they give them? Is that okay to do a little bit of a trial? Let's do it. Okay, so 2-3 minutes. Just find someone ideally next to you who don't already know. Is there something, could you add them to your MBAs, your mental, but this time in real life? Is there something you want to share with them? Let's give it a try. Okay, a 2-minute warning, 2-minute warning. Okay, thanks everyone. Hopefully we all got a. I was talking to Simon in the break, and as you were talking, and he distinguished between Simon, an MBA and a real board advisor. Can you explain the difference as well?
Yeah, so the MBA is when you go into your mind. A real life MBA is more like akin to a mastermind. So I was sharing with Sharaf just now that when I was going through the writing journey, of course, there are moments where you get writer's block and where you go through the ups and the downs of writing a book. And so what I would put together is a writing accountability group where there'll be other people also on the same journey as me. We would turn off the volume in our Zooms and we'd just have the video up. And it's almost like going to a gym class when you've got lots of other people in the same room as you. The moment you feel like giving up and you see that everybody else is still going on the treadmill or on the weights, you feel inspired to keep going. And that was what I was trying to tap into with this accountability group.
Thanks, Simon. And so I'm going to use this a little bit for some free therapy, if it's okay as well. So one thing I struggle with is, that I buy into the whole point about energy and finding that and channeling that. But often there's this kind of sense of perfection. I want to do it, but I'm in that writing group, for example, and I struggled a lot with many drafts of the book. How do you avoid that perfection bias? How do you try and keep that inner voice a bit more still?
Sure, I think there's one tip that I learned, and I can't remember where I got it from through the journey, but it said you can always edit a written page, but you can't edit a blank page. And so I think the focus is to just write and not be worried about the finished product. And it reminds me of, there's a Zen quote written in one of the temples in Kyoto. If you've ever been to Kyoto in Japan, you will know when you go to these temples, it is full of Zen wisdom. And one of the statements goes, be attached to no outcome and open to everything. And so in the writing process, we have to be present, or with anything we're doing, because we just don't know how long it's going to take, whether we're going to write the book we want to write, but just focus in the moment. What is on my mind? What can I put down? And just take one step at a time. And it's linked to, there's another story I mentioned about Michael Jordan in the book. If you've ever seen The Last Dance, that there is an episode in which the interviewer asked one of Michael Jordan's coaches, and he says, what made Michael Jordan Michael Jordan? And he said, I don't think it was because he was tall or he was hardworking, because in basketball, you have to be tall, and if you want to make the first team, you've got to be hardworking. So it wasn't those things. He said, I think that Michael was a mystic. Many people travel to India and spend months in ashrams. Michael completely lived in the moment. When he was on the court, he didn't think about the last shot. He didn't worry about the next shot. He was focused on the current shot that he was taking. And so I think it's the same with the journey. It's just to sort of focus on that next step and then worry about the next step when you get there.
Really powerful. And how do you talked about, there's a lovely, the book is full of great quotes. One was on this idea that we're both the sculptor and the sculpture. You like that? I think you were talking about being kinder to ourselves, right? How do we do that? How do we stop being so critical of ourselves in that process?
Sure. So I think just to the first question about being the sculpture and the sculptor, what that is speaking to is the fact that there is no one reality. There is only customized realities. So when an event happens, the way you interpret that event will be different to the way I do, and different to the way your partner does, your colleague does, your friend does. Now, that tells us that reality is simply us living in the feeling of our thinking moment to moment to moment. When we take back that power to control our thoughts and choose the response that we want, that is when we become the sculptor and the sculptor, because now we are literally sculpting, bending, and shaping our reality into exactly the one that we want to create and live by. Now, in terms of speaking kinder to ourselves, I think that is a challenge for a lot of us, because when we accomplish something, suddenly the critic jumps in. Yeah, you may finish a marathon, but then the critic jumps in and says, well, you didn't hit your PB, or you didn't get the medal. And so we can be very harsh to ourselves and forget the fact that we've actually accomplished something. And I think that the process of becoming a parent in the last couple of years has also made me more kinder to myself, because I've realized that doing your best when you are a parent is different to doing your best when you are a single parent and doing your best when you're trying to juggle multiple jobs. And so it's simply just bringing it down to just doing your best each day. And that's what we should focus on. If we focus on that, then we will enjoy the results.
Powerful. Just a last slide, and we'll open up very soon. So please have some questions ready and thoughts. But this idea of managing our energy and not time, there's a whole productivity industry that's been developed, with the self-help piece around how we manage time. I was reading 4,000 Weeks recently, and what he talks about, the author there, is that we more or less will have about 4,000 weeks to live, and you cannot find a productivity solution to our time. If anyone's done this, I've tried once to all my emails finish by 5 o'clock. What of course happens at exactly 5:08, you start to get emails back for being so efficient. So you cannot find it. You've got to sort of prioritize and find the energy. Tell us a few of the tips that you mentioned in the book, Simon, about that idea of really managing energy rather than time.
Sure. Well, just on the concept of the energy and time, then maybe I'll share a tip or two on how I do it. Now, when we think about productivity, we default to wanting to manage our time better. I think the challenge of purely focusing on time management is it assumes that our energy is constant throughout the whole day, which is not true. Our energy goes through cycles, it goes through rhythms. So when you plan your diary, say 4 o'clock, I'm going to go to do a workout, 6 o'clock, I'm going to start on that project, that actually won't happen. Because you think you're time blocking an important activity, but what you're actually doing is you're discarding the fact that your energy is going to take a huge dip after mid-afternoon, and so the likelihood you do it is near zero. Now, if the weather suddenly rains and you have a busy day, even less likely that you're actually going to follow through with that. So once we start to understand how energy works for us, we can actually work with it and not against it. And one of the tips that I share in the book is understanding that to make meaningful progress in our life is less about doing more and more about doing less of the things that are holding us back. So I know some people have already joked with me in the conversations I've had before this talk began, when they said, Simon, you look exactly as you do on social media, black t-shirt, jeans, and Adidas Gazelle trainers. And I said, that is because it takes away a layer of decision making. I don't have to think about what to wear every morning. I still remember the time, and you probably can't imagine this, but I had gelled up long hair when I was a teenager, and that took some time to gel up the hair and style it every morning. Now when I just get it shaved off, there's nothing to worry about. I don't have to worry about doing my hair every morning. So things like that, where I was hacking away at the inessential so I can focus on what mattered most. So those would be one of the things that I would say.
I think the idea of reducing choice is really powerful. So I was did my very first all-inclusive holiday with my 2 kids and my wife, and I promised myself I would never be a parent who took up kids to one of these, but actually the chance of not having to think about where we went, what we did, where we ate, it was really liberating, so it makes a lot. Last question for me, Simon, as well. Where does Simon the future go? Where are you thinking about next? Where's your energy going in terms of where your work and direction's going as well?
Short term, a nice break. So after this, I'll probably spend some time with the wife and child to let this all soak in, and to then plan my next steps. So we'll see what happens. There's a few things in the works, but if you follow me on social media, you'll get to see what they are in due course.
Very cool. And I hear there's some amazing guests in the audience. One person from LA, was that right? Or from
our firm here came from Los Angeles. I think
respect for that. So,
I think we also had Niraj from Northern Ireland. So yeah, people flying in. Anyone else from further field than that? Los Angeles and Northern Ireland it is.
Very good. So from this, from this very glitzy global audience, what are your questions? And I think, Rosie, I think there's some mics at the back there. Who would like to kick off first?
You want to get straight to the book signing, I see.
So a hand up here, Rosie. So.
Hiya, I have a question. It's Bev James for Simon. I'm here, Simon. Hiya. Hello, over here. Other way.
Oh,
other way.
perfect. I can't see with the lights.
In your brilliant book, and I've read a lot of personal development books over an extensive period of time, and there was one thing in your book that really resonated with me, was very often we work to a to-do list, but you talk about a not to-do list, which I thought was incredible. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure, Bev, and great to have Bev here. I trained at the Coaching Academy, and Bev and her team and work has been a big part of my own journey. So it's incredible to have Bev here this evening. So on the not to-do list, what I talk about in the book is that many of us work to a to-do list. And I'm not sure about you, but every time I've used a to-do list, I never get to finish it because there's always something new that comes onto it. And Sharaf, you were even saying at 5:08, you get more emails coming back. Whereas a not-to-do list is you setting up some boundaries. So it is the things that you commit not to do so you have the oxygen to focus on what is most important. So when you have a set of things on your not-to-do list, and the objective is not to have a long not-to-do list because you just won't remember it, but just to have a small number of things on your not-to-do list. And when you start applying that, you just find yourself having a lot greater thinking space to focus on your most important tasks.
Simon, can I just have one follow-up question on that? So I'm in this situation right now. I've committed to do something next week. I don't really want to do it. I shouldn't have committed. How do you let people down gently?
Sure, we got some strategies coming out here now. So I'm going to reference actually a great mentor of mine, Bob Burke. He is a co-author of a book called The Go-Giver. And he shared something with me that I thought was incredible on how he rejects gracefully, because he knows he can't say yes to everything. And he gave me an example. He said, Simon, let's imagine the scenario of somebody asking you to serve on a committee, but you just don't have the energy or the capacity or bandwidth to do so. So he said the way to do it is to follow this structure: gratitude, no, and even more gratitude. So it would be something like this: thank you so much for considering me for this wonderful opportunity. I must say no to that, but please know how grateful I am that you considered me for this wonderful project. Now, if you were the recipient of that no, I can't imagine you would get angry or frustrated about that no. In fact, you would take it very well. And so that's how I think we can approach saying no and rejecting the things we don't want to do.
I think my first job, I got rejected by McKinsey & Company. That was very much the way the letter went. I think it was like a whole page of all these great things you were, but sorry, we couldn't give you the job. So. There's a question at the front here, Rosie, if that's okay, or do you want to stand up? Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Hi, Simon. I've spoken to a lot of people today at the Conduit who have been a little bit scared of success. We often talk about how we manage failure, but actually there's often a fear of success and how we manage that and keep energy going. And a little about the question like, what next? What guidance would you give for people to foster that energy to keep success and not self-sabotage? I've spoken to a lot of people who are self-sabotaging today.
Sure, great question. So how do we manage the fear of success? For me, this is where environment optimization comes in. Now, every part of your journey, you're going to be spending time with different people. So the people I spent time with when I was in banking is different to the people I spent time with when I transitioned into being an entrepreneur, and different to the people I spend time with now. So I think that as long as you are spending time and energy with people that are ahead of you, they're going to keep you energized because they're going to show you what is possible. The problem is when you become the smartest person in the room, you can get complacent because you think you know it all and everybody just becomes yes people. But when you challenge yourself to be put into places and environments in which you can sometimes feel like the dumbest person, you're always going to be energized because there's so much more to learn. You become a sponge like a child is when they're soaking in all this new knowledge. You become a sponge for all that new information. And that keeps you, I think, motivated and energized to try on new challenges, which is what I'm going to be doing in the next few months, is going to be taking on some new challenges that will push me again out of my comfort zone, just in the same way I have been with the book.
Fantastic. Other questions? There's one just here, Rosie, at the front. Or thanks.
I have a question. Hello. Just behind this post. Hello, Simon. This is Kai.
Hey, Kai.
Good to see you, and huge congratulations for the first book. And I was fortunate enough to have met you through Clubhouse, and that led to the introduction to Conduit, which is a fantastic place, and it's so fitting to meet so much energy here. My question probably represents a question from everybody, or lots of people, is that now you have reached this new platform with this first book. There must be a lot of possibilities of co-authoring with other great minds out there. So if you are to pick 3 people you want to co-author the next book with, who and why, please? You don't have to do this for marketing purpose.
I was going to say, Kai, I will have to come back to that question because I think that would depend on the type of book I write. that would determine who I would want to co-author with. But I think there are some incredible people I would love to do something with. But yeah, I haven't had time to think beyond this book. Once I do, then we can discuss that further.
Thank you. Nice evasion.
Simon, hi, it's Neeraj here from Northern Ireland. How are you? First of all, many congratulations this evening. I know we spoke about your book almost a year ago, and one of the great joys I get in life is seeing my friends succeed at what they do. So I'm so happy for you. Really well done. The question I have comes from page 52 of your book. 20th line down. No, I don't, I'm not sure. Page 52 of your book, you talk about what does success mean to you. Now, for a lot of people, success, they mistakenly think it's money. It's not. Money is wonderful. It's a byproduct of success, but it's not success. What does success mean to Simon Alexander-Ong? Thank you.
Good question. And good to have you here, Neeraj. For me, success is all about legacy now. I think that when I look at the career trajectory I've been on, and I think for many of us, we will probably go on this ourselves, is at the beginning, I was focused on what I would say are career virtues. You know, the company I worked for, how much money I earned, what title I had, how quickly I got promoted. Those are all the things that we put on our CVs and we tell recruiters and interviewers to try and get jobs in companies. But I think that through the work that I've done, success to me now is about legacy. And that is when we begin to shift our energy from career virtues to legacy virtues, which are things such as the impact that you have had on the lives of others, the story that you have written, and how people will remember you when you have gone. So that is all it is to me now. It's just to create a legacy that I can be proud of, but also that I can get my daughter, maybe more children down the line, who knows, to continue that legacy. And it's something that, I don't know if you've watched one of Richard Branson's interviews, but he was asked, how should we judge your success when you eventually pass? And Branson said, do not judge my success by how well Virgin has done. Judge my success by the quality of my children. And that speaks to legacy. And so for me, Neeraj, success is all about legacy.
Sorry, can I just ask great quote there as well. And just to build on that, how do you take people on the journey with you? If you redefine success in that way, that's not how conventionally, as Neeraj was saying, people think. How do you bring people on, and do you explicitly talk about that idea of legacy?
Yeah, so for me, there's a statement I share in the book that goes, our value as humans is determined by how much more we have given to the world than we have taken from it. And I think that when we give to the world through the ability to serve and create, that is how we take people on the journey with us. And I know here in the audience there are some incredible people doing exactly this in the line of work that they do. And that is exactly how we inspire. You know, it's a cliche saying to lead by example, but that is how we inspire. We inspire by putting things out into the world that will make people look up, think differently, and want to create change in their own life. They begin to realize that we can either continue as the way things are, or we can do something about it now. And if we can have an influence on that in any shape or form, that is how we begin creating legacy.
Thanks, Simon. There was a question, I think, here at the front. Do you want to go
Hi,
for it?
Simon. Loved the book. I started reading it. I've got one word, it was compelling. I read a lot of personal development books as well, like I'm sure loads of people do, and I really enjoyed it. You recently put out a video about the Energize Cocktail on social media. I don't know if anyone's seen that. Absolutely stunning. Love the video. So if Simon Ong was making the cocktail of his own life, his own virtues, his own vibes, what are the ingredients of this cocktail?
That is a great question, and I'm going to evade it for one reason, and and that's purely because I don't really drink that much, so I would have no idea what ingredients to choose from, but I would probably consult Mr. Aggo Peroni over here, who created the Energized Cocktail at the Connaught Hotel.
Simon, what would the cocktail be called, at least, even the ingredients? I think, how would you describe it?
That's a good question. If I were to name the cocktail anything, I think it would probably be called One is the first word that comes to my head. One, because I think that few of us appreciate that we only have one life. And the moment that we do is the moment we begin truly living. So I'll probably call it One, because I think once we start to understand that we only have one life, that's when all of us begin living very differently. So it's a nice mark for a change in the direction of our lives.
Fantastic. We'll all be ordering it at the bar later on. So there's a question at the back there, I think, if I can see.
Hey, Simon, it's Dylan. How are you, my brother?
Doing good, Dylan.
Fantastic. Listen, love you, love your work. It's been a real privilege to share some of the journey with you since those real early days. I guess my question speaks to a world where everybody wants to be a coach, everybody wants to share expertise. You've only got to kind of flick through social media and there are people trying to tell you how to live life. So for those of us that are kind of looking at that thinking, where is my USP? How did you find your USP? Because I think you've carved out a really neat, unique offering, and that's kind of propelled you to pretty great heights. For those of us kind of thinking about publishing, for those of us thinking about kind of taking our great works to the world, how do we carve out that USP in perhaps the way that you've done?
Hey, Dylan, and great question. Well, I'm going to broaden the question, if I may, to business at a high level. Now, when you start a business, we are in a world now in which it has never been easier to start a business in most industries, because you can set up a website, you can start your social media account, and you can get going within just a day or so. Now, if I bring that back to the world of coaching, anybody can say they're a coach nowadays. And I think in order to differentiate myself or yourself in your field, it is to think different. How can you think different? And so when I started my journey, I didn't do this intentionally, but it actually really helped me to think different, is I didn't spend a huge amount of time around fellow coaches and speakers. I deliberately wanted to diversify the environment that I was around. So to give an example, spending time hanging out with musicians or film directors, cocktail makers, hoteliers, tech entrepreneurs, singers. And here's why this is important, because I think when we diversify the inputs that come into our mind, it helps us to think different, to think creative. So Nilesh mentioned the cocktail drink for the book. I just didn't see anybody who had a cocktail for a book before. So I was like, let's do it. And then, I don't know if Ravi's here tonight as well, but learning from the film industry, I was like, well, if you look at films, they have trailers before the film comes out. I want to do a book trailer. And so I think that when we diversify the inputs that come into our mind, what happens is that we begin to think differently. We begin to think more creative. And that's how we discover our own spin on what we do. Whereas if we only focus on our competition within the industry we're in, we can only be as good as the competition. So that sets a limit and a bar to where we can get to. But if we start to look at people, companies, and teams outside of our own, we can actually draw inspiration from that, bring it into our own, and suddenly it looks innovative. It's not a new idea, but it's just a new idea in a completely different industry. So I think if we focus on cultivating that creativity, that is how we begin to stand out. And on USP, I like to think unique serving point instead of unique selling point, because I think that when we serve, that is how we add value to the world. So Dylan, thank you for the great question there.
Thank you, brother. Great answer. Love your work, man.
Simon, can I ask a follow-on question to Dylan's, which is that, okay, a lot of us would like to have these diverse social networks. I love working across sectors. How do we build the confidence? Often we're very comfortable in a particular sector. It's quite scary to go out and try and venture out.
It is scary, and I think we have to have the courage to venture out and network with people beyond our borders. For me, I was doing a talk this morning to Ernst & Young about branding. And one of the things I said to them is the reason why many people find networking boring is because when they get asked what you do, we just introduce ourselves with a job title and we already make a decision based on that job title. But if we can start finding some fun in how we network and build relationships, that's how we get people curious about what we do and wanting to have a conversation. So just to give an example, I follow a guy in America called James Whitaker, who has been one of my inspirations as a public speaker. And I still remember when he shared how he networked. He said, I put myself in positions in which there are rooms of people doing completely different things to me, and I love having fun with that audience in telling them what I do. And I said, how do you answer that question then? And he said, I replied to that question by saying, I have been saving the world from boredom since before you were born. And what happens next is the person that he says that to says, tell me more. Now, what have you just started? You started a conversation. So when we have some fun with how we build relationships, when we look at different ways of having conversation, of meeting new people, what happens is now people become more interested in what you have to say, but also it becomes more fun. So that would be what I would share on that.
Great tip. I hope we'll try that out in the bar afterwards as well. So please do that if you meet someone new here, which I hope you will. The question here.
We've got a question here as well.
Yeah. Hi, Simon. It's Bobby here.
Hey, Bobby.
Yeah, I've had a Simon for 16 years. We were both at Lehman, right till the very end. So like Niraj, he picked page 52. I'm going to add 100 pages. We go to page 152. So it's about slowing down in order to speed up. So slow down in order to speed up. Sometimes, again, we're here with lots of successful people, and my friends as well. Sometimes we egg each other on in terms of being toxically productive. We're like, oh, I worked 12 hours today. I worked 14 hours today. You know, oh, I cut off my holiday. How do you think slowing down to speed up actually works to sort of in terms of practicality?
Sure. Well, I believe that slowing down is a superpower, especially in today's world. You only have to look at the last couple of years where most people in this world have had the chance to step off that hamster wheel. When lockdown was initiated, suddenly we had more time to do introspection. We were able to slow down because we were working from our homes again. And as part of that process, people started to discover themselves, what is important to them. And you may have heard of the term the Great Resignation. And people started to change careers, change jobs, because they thought, now is probably a good time for me to explore what I really want to do. But for me, the real benefit, and many people I've spoken to can relate to this, is that when we do spend more time slowing down and in silence, we discover that the answers we seek are in that space. Many of us have discovered that in the last few years. Actually, when you look at the greatest creative breakthroughs going back in history, most of them have not come from people sitting in front of their desk for hours each day. They have come from the act of creating decompression time and white space in their calendar. Isaac Newton, apple on the head, gravity. Archimedes, in the bath, displacement theory. Thomas Edison, fishing with no bait, so nobody, not even the fish, would disturb him. These were deliberate and intentional practices to slow the mind down so that they can connect the strands of all the data that the mind was taking in. And we can't do that if we're always on that hamster wheel. So I think it really is a superpower, Bobby. And I think that more and more people are understanding the importance of mindfulness and presence.
So I often think of, rather than a great resignation, a great reflection. And how do we keep that spirit up? Because there were some very positive aspects of the pandemic in that time, and that more unstructured time to see our kids, but also think and figure out, how do we keep that? Now we're going back to the world of hybrid or real work for most people. Any tips there?
I think I will share one tip on this, and that is when you go into your calendar or your diary, that you schedule in me time as much as you schedule in your work meetings, your social events, and your holiday. Because we're good at doing the other three, but we're not so good at doing the me time. And if you don't schedule it in, there will always be something else that will take its place. So that will be the one thing I would share.
Thanks, Simon. There's a question here, I think.
Hi, Simon. I'm Pritesh. I am unlike everyone else because I'm meeting you today as a result of your trailer, so your trailer works. And I want to talk to you about energy for a second. Helen Tupper, who you know as well, we had a conversation when your passion kicks in, it doesn't feel like effort because it's a thing that you care about, it's a thing that you want. A lot of people, I guess, in this room are following things that they've figured out, they've got their board of people around them. So when you're in the groove, when you've got that flow of energy, why does it wane still? Why do people, even here, when they hear you say a quote, when we see something on social, we go, oh my God, I buy into that. Why do we constantly need inspiration, even though we may have found our thing? Why does our energy wane?
Good question. And I think you're right. Even when we are doing something that we're passionate about, we still can get exhausted, because what happens is if we go too much into the flow, we can actually look back at the clock and think, wow, the whole day has gone and I've just done this one thing. And we need that regular reset and rejuvenation periods, because the whole goal in this process is to thrive, not just to survive. And so we've got to understand that this is a long game. And many of us fall into the trap of focusing on intensity over consistency. And so we go all out when we get that inspiration, we get that project idea, we go, okay, the next week I'm going to block out, I'm going to do this one project and see it through to the end. And often, in reality, we underestimate how long that thing takes. And so we think to ourselves, oh, I've got this far, I might as well just finish it now, get to the end. And before you know it, the whole month is gone. And so I think before we jump into something, we have to pause and look at it from a logical way, and not always let our passion override the fact that we also have to nurture and take care of ourselves.
Thank you.
Question at the front here as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for passing the mic.
I recently interviewed you on my podcast. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that, because it's about pause, purpose, and play. So when hearing some of your values being around curiosity, being, you know, the eternal student, how can we think about play as a way to also energize ourselves?
Definitely, good question. How can we think of play as a way of energizing ourselves? Now, I think my simple response to that is, unless what you do in terms of the process is fun, you are going to get bored and you're going to give up very easily. So it's all about thinking, how can I make the process of what I'm doing fun so that I'm excited and energized to do more of it? So to give an example, the last few months, I've been focusing on the book campaign. Now, for me, if it was just doing the same thing everybody else did, I would be pretty exhausted. But because there was so much fun built into the process, there was a lot of creativity built into the process, I wanted to experiment, to try things. What I was saying earlier about diversifying my inputs, I was being inspired by people in different industries, and I was thinking, let's give that a try. Let's try that. And so that, for me, was really fun, because I love creativity. I love trying to think different, and so that's what is important to me. If I'm going to do something, how can I make it fun?
Thank you.
Any questions at the back? Was there just
Simon? Oh, Simon Beju, over here.
Go for it, Simon.
Hey, Beju.
How are you doing, my friend?
Doing good.
Fantastic, great. Energy, we all know that when we manage our energy, things can happen, but energy is closely linked to emotion. And depending on the emotion you feel, there's an immediate impact of energy. Like if you feel apathetic, there's not much to draw upon. If you feel a sense of pride, or if you accept something, energy goes. What would you say to someone where emotionally they're not in a good place? What would you say are some of the things you talk about in the book in terms of using energy in a way to get the emotion? Because sometimes when we don't control emotion, energy dips. But when you try and control an emotion, it's difficult, but you have to accept different types of emotion. So what would you say to someone in terms of using emotion in relation to energizing themselves?
Sure. Great question, Beju. So in terms of understanding our emotion, that is, for me, why it is important to understand ourselves first. Because emotion, drawing on that word, is nothing but energy in motion. That's what it is in reality. It is energy in motion. And so when you have positive emotions, when you look at vibrations, love is the highest form of energy, because when you do something you love, when you're with someone you love, you discover resources within you you would not otherwise have found. I mean, think about your first crush as an example. Even though you already have plans for the weekend and your crush says yes, that they want to grab coffee with you, what do? Do you say no and continue with your plans? No. Suddenly you've got time. You found the energy to make time in your diary. And also, if you are supporting a cause that you believe in and you're doing it out of love, again, what happens? You would travel however long it takes because you believe in that cause. That is the power of love as a form of energy. And so once we begin to understand the role that emotion plays and how we feel, we can be better owners of those emotions. Now, it's not to say you shouldn't feel them. Of course we should feel them. We're human beings at the end of the day. But it's also to understand them and how we can respond to them and not react to them in a healthy way.
Thanks, Simon. There was one question at the front. I'll just take you up, please.
Hi, Simon. My name's Andy. I work in the fintech sector. Apologies, I haven't read your book yet, but I will be now. I'm actually really interested in the role of energy as it relates to your parenting journey. So I've got 3 small children, and I actually find energy from the work environment is relatively easy, but it can be exhausting at the end of the day. And then I come home to my 3 small children, and they're like, Daddy, I want to play. And when they're very young, you get very little back from, you know, a 6-month-old baby. So how do you bring energy to that environment when it's potentially harder to connect and associate that particular experience with energizing yourself?
Sure, good question. And obviously I can relate being a fellow parent, my daughter being 2 years old now. For me, there's 2 parts to that. I actually feel more productive now I'm a parent, because when my child is at nursery, I know I've only got a fixed number of hours that I can get work done. And that makes me more efficient. At the same time, what it does, it means that when I do come home, I can spend time and energy with my child. And that for me is important. And I think we're distinguishing between time and energy, because you may be spending the night with your child, but are you actually present? Is your energy with him or her? And for many of us, it isn't, because we have worries from the day, we're thinking about tomorrow, we're stressed about the project we've got to work on next week. And so until we can close that and spend time with our child, then our minds can be elsewhere. But for me, what has given me energy during the 2 years that I've been a parent, and this has been on the backdrop of a COVID pandemic in which we had to learn from scratch, and we were using Google and YouTube to survive those 2 years. For me, it has just been coming from a place of gratitude, being grateful for the fact that we are in a position of being parents, because I know a lot of people who haven't been able to give birth to children, or parents who have lost children. And that always gives me a sense of energy, to know that I get the opportunity to see this human being every single day.
Thank you.
Simon, do you have a ritual? So when you leave, when you finish work, before you start to go see your kids, is there a way you re-energize, I guess, and give yourself space between the 2?
Sure. Well, I would say before being a parent, I had a lot of rituals. Now that I'm a parent, my rituals can change on a regular basis, because any parent here can relate that you can have the best rituals, but the moment your child gets ill or something happens, then you have to shift all of your plans and change your day. So I do have certain rituals, but now they are mostly at the bookends of my day. So the morning and the evening, because I know that once the day starts, very often it can be out of my control. But at least the morning and the evening, those are the things I can control.
Thanks, Simon. Any final question? I think we're going to come one at the back there. Someone raise a hand.
Hi, Simon. Susan Fang here. So congratulations on your publication. So my question is, you must have gone through one of those days when you're so low on energy, you're giving, and suddenly you've got nothing to give. What is your go-to practice to re-energize yourself that works all the time? Thank you.
That's the easiest question. Gym. I go to the gym, I go for a workout, I go for a swim. When I'm done with that, I'm ready to hit the work again, because I think that is one of the most powerful things we can do to re-energize. I mean, there's a question I put in the book that says, how do you want to feel today? Now, when you feel lacking of energy, but you ask yourself that question at the beginning of the day, how do I want to feel? Naturally, it will draw you to wanting to move your body. So moving my body in that way is, for me, the best way to re-energize.
Amazing. Okay, we'll take one very last question there. I think I saw a lady on the front there. If you could pass the microphone to her. Thanks, Rosie. Sorry for the journey across.
Re-energizing myself. Hi, Simon. I was also from Lehman before, so hello you.
This is like a reunion here tonight.
I haven't read your book, but I think I definitely will grab one. And hearing everything that you said and people asking questions, I'm more curious how your wife keep her energy, because because I think it's all very, easy and fair to say, oh, I hate gym and I got more energy. When you have a 2-year-old, I have a 2.5-year-old, and I just want to point out, wait until they're 2.5, because they are much easier when they're little, and they become just so much more as their energy becomes more, and it's crazy. So, it's sometimes my question might not be very appropriate, but it's about this mom's guilt towards my child, that any time that I spend not with her, even today, I had a fantastic day doing business, out with friends, and coming here with this great bunch of people. It's the first time in a long, long time, relieve me from my mom duty and back to my very much loved and passionate business, life. And this energized me, and I get this old groove back, and I know the feeling I love. But every moment I struggle, and I think, tonight my husband puts my baby in bed. He can't find a pajama. He was texting me where the pajama is, how much milk to give her, my baby doesn't want him to sing a lullaby, and all sort of thing. Anyway, and this big guilt that, oh my God, I wasn't there to give the absolute best to my child. Every single day, I always think or actually feel that kind of makes me, it's always kind of dragging me back a bit. Every time I think about, I'm going to step full back in business, and that feeling just makes me feel, but I'm supposed to, especially the first 3 years, I'm supposed to give everything to my child. And that kind of is always a struggle. I know it might not be something you are most familiar, but you have a little child. So
sure. So there's a couple of questions there. So just on the first question, how my wife keeps herself energized, maybe I'll connect you to her and you can ask her afterwards. She would probably be best to respond to that one. In terms of the mum's guilt, a quick answer for that one is I think maybe you should train your husband to be able to put the pajamas on. On the more serious note, I think I have also experienced that. My wife has also experienced that because we both run businesses. And as you can relate, you mentioned you're also involved in business. It isn't a 9 to 5, and sometimes it can consume a lot of your thinking. But the way we've been handling it, and again, we are also a work in progress, so we will, of course, face, as you said, just wait till they're 2.5, so we've got that coming up for ourselves. But what we do is we realize that when we take time away from our daughter, when she's in nursery, or when we take turns looking after her, it means when we slow down, when we get that rest, we can come back and be a better parent when we do spend time with them. Because imagine the opposite scenario. Imagine you were with them 24/7 and you had no time to have off. Imagine your energy then with your child. It wouldn't be there. But if you actually get some time to yourself and understand that when you do get time to spend with your child, you can do so with more energy, I think your child will appreciate that even more.
Lovely, thank you. I'd love to connect with your wife.
Lots of connections you made this evening. So I want to draw this evening to a close, everyone. Thanks for all the energy in this audience here. We're going to go on to some book signing after this and some drinks at the end there. Both Simon, I think you stay on, and similarly, our books are there. But really, this is Simon's evening. And I want to say a huge congratulations for having the energy to get to this milestone, Simon, as well. It's a major achievement. It's not easy. And I think that last question really framed it, because I think for too many years we've felt guilty about putting the time in to think about ourselves, our own energy, our own sense of purpose, and how do we keep that going. And I think what you've done with the book is give us a lot of new tools for how to harness that, both for ourselves, but also in that example, for others in that regard as well. So I'm sure we'll go forward with a lot of ideas and insights and new energy. I hope we'll meet some new friends this evening. Try some of the tips that Simon gave us in that, and all the very best for the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you for coming here this evening. Thank you so much for your support.